But let us look at today's topic. It is Circular 230, and that is the Tax Professionals Bible. And for the purposes of the exam and for real life, we're using the June 2014 version of Circular 230. The reason we're still using the June 2014 version is because the IRS hasn't updated since then, and it is a lot more difficult to update than many of the other things that the IRS publishes, because this is the baseline for practice and procedure and ethics for all tax professionals representing clients before the IRS, and everything needs to run through a lot of different departments, including IRS counsel, before they are able to release a new edition. But rumor has it they are going to release a new edition next year. Don't hold your breath. In the meantime, we are looking at what Prometric tells us about the EA exam. So the current year's enrolled agent exam covers any laws that are part of the Internal Revenue Code, any forms or publications that were amended up through December 31st, 2020. All of the questions relate to 2020 unless they mention an earlier year. So whenever you're seeing current year in the questions, you're looking at a 2020 issue. So you need to forget about any laws that were passed in 2021 that were retroactive to 2019, 20, and even 2018. So for the most part, in part one and part two, those issues were relevant. In part three, not so much. We haven't had much that really changed within the law in part three. Today's lecture is going to have certain reference information and phone numbers that I'm not going to have. You're just not going to find them on the IRS website. So I'm getting questions from a lot of you asking for this information. Please don't ask me for this information because they are going to be in today's class. So save this, use this to look up the information when you need it, because I am giving it to you now, and I'm not your filing cabinet. That's what I tell my clients. You have the information. Please make sure to look up the information about who you're trying to reach before you ask me how to find somebody. So let's talk about practice, because Circular 230 is all about practice. And one of the big questions about what practice means before the Internal Revenue Service is it only representation, or is it more than that? So it doesn't just mean preparing tax returns. Practice before the IRS includes all matters connected with a presentation to the IRS on behalf of the taxpayer. So what's a presentation? These are, vague generalities, right? So it's not limited to, it includes, but not limited to preparing documents, filing documents, corresponding and communicating with the IRS, issuing written advice with respect to any entity or transaction, or any arrangement having a potential for tax avoidance or evasion, and also representing a client at conferences, hearings, and meetings. So for those people who think that representation does not include preparing tax returns, in fact, it does. Let's look at the first polling question, which is practice before the IRS includes all of these acts except preparing documents, corresponding with the IRS, preparing a tax court petition, or representing a client at an IRS conference. So all of those things relate to the IRS, except one thing does not relate to the IRS, and that is preparing the tax court petition. We don't have any direct authority before the tax court, do we? When we become enrolled agents, it's about representing clients before the IRS. So the tax court petition, C, would be the answer to this question. Remember to read the questions carefully for the exam. I'm going to leave that open for a moment. Well, now we've got 93% in. So let's go ahead and end the poll. And everybody was getting it right, and then 2 people went to A and to D. So overall, the oversight for tax professionals involves 2 different offices of the IRS. It used to be that we were completely overseen and governed by the IRS's Office of Professional Responsibility. And a few years back, they split that into 2, and now we have the OPR, the Office of Professional Responsibility, and the RPO, which is the Return Preparer Office. So it's important to understand the difference between the 2 of them and what they do. So I'm going to give you links to all of the information for all the different IRS offices, resources, and so forth. Very important links today. So first of all, the link to the OPR, which used to be known as the Director of Practice, is over here. That was before 2003 when they changed all that. Their vision is to be the standard bearer for integrity in tax practice. And their mission is to interpret and apply the standards of practice for tax professionals in a fair and equitable manner based on the rules in Circular 230. Have they done that? Generally, OPR has done a pretty reasonable and fair job. So I have not heard any complaints from people about OPR being high-handed. They oversee our ethics and our professionalism. They report directly to the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. The main office is in Washington, D.C. They have another office in Detroit. Karen Hawkins used to be the head of the OPR. She was the director. She was the director of practice. And then they had a lot of temporary people for the next several years. Finally, last year, we got a permanent director, and that is Sharon Fisk, who is a California girl. Somebody that the commissioner had had some contact with and experience with her expertise. OPR has 3 different segments within their operation: the Office of the Director, Legal Analysis Branch, and Operations and Management Branch. Most of the time, you're going to have no contacts with them. So their mission is basically to support effective tax administration. They are trying to increase the awareness of the rules of Circular 230 and ethics, apply the principles of due process to investigation, analysis, and enforcement, build and train and motivate a cohesive OPR team. The important takeaway from this is, if you have sanctions brought against you, ultimately it's going to come before the Office of Professional Responsibility, and that's where you're going to have kind of an internal review of the situation before it ends up going into court or the administrative law judge or anything like that. So this is the first place where we're able to really dig in our heels if someone files a complaint against us. There's an initial lower level situation that might go to the return preparer office, but if the return preparer office thinks there's something more serious, the investigation is going to come to OPR. So they have a whole lot of commitments on their website. I'm not going to read this to you, but if you have the time and you're curious, you may want to take a look at what the information is that they think of as their commitment and their objectives. How do you reach the Office of Professional Responsibility if something comes up and you want to turn somebody in or you want to defend yourself? Generally, if you need to defend yourself, you're going to get correspondence. And that will have specific contact information, dates, and deadlines. But if you ever need to reach them, you can contact them at opr@irs.gov, or you can call that phone number over there. They also have an eFax, and only the eFax number is on the website. The phone number is no longer on the website. They've removed that. This is one of those phone numbers that I told you, one of the bits of information you're not going to find on public information. You're only going to find it here. If you need to send them information, you have a problem, a complaint, or something else, don't send any confidential information via email. Talk to them. Talk to them first. Ask them how they want to receive it. Most likely, they need it to be faxed or mailed. I don't know if they're actually opening real paper mail. But anytime you contact them and you're talking to somebody, make sure you get the name of the person and their employee ID number, but also just be friendly with them. They may be your first line of defense if there are ever any problems or complaints filed against you. Make sure they get a good impression of you. Let's do the next polling question. And that is, which is not an objective of the Office of Professional Responsibility? Increase awareness and understanding of Circular 230 and OPR through outreach activities, yes. Apply the principles of due process to the investigation, analysis, enforcement, and litigation of Circular 230. Build, train, and motivate a cohesive OPR team. Register and promote a qualified tax professional community. No. So D is not part of their objectives. D is part of the Return Preparer's Office objective, and we'll take a look at what they do in just a moment. I'm going to give you just another moment. I've only got 89% in. Most people are getting it right. Okay, I'm going to continue and give you another few seconds. Oh, there we go. 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're ending the poll. Okay, we've got 92% in, and practically everybody has D is the correct answer. Now, what if you want to check the status of an enrolled agent? Well, there is a link to place on the IRS website, or you can call their Detroit office at this phone number, 313-234-1280, which they have removed from the website, or you can send them an email at epp@irs.gov. So those are some of the ways you can reach the office to find out if somebody is in good standing. You can also send them an email to opr@irs.gov. Make sure you include the name of the person you're trying to learn more information about. However, you may not need to do that. You may not need to do that at this point because the IRS publishes a directory. It's a public directory, and it includes all EAs, CPAs, attorneys, and people with an annual filing season program record of completion. Anybody whose status is active or the credential is active is in that database. So what I did was I searched for my last name within 5 miles of my zip code, my PO box. And when I did that this year, there is only one result. In prior years, there were 5 results. There were 5 Rosenbergs within 5 miles of my PO box, none of whom are related to me, but now, and some of them were CPAs and so forth. But you can see it shows you my name, my credential as an enrolled agent, and an annual filing season program record of completion. It tells you the location, but not the address. So it's not going to have any contact information. It will just let you know if somebody is in good standing. Sherry wants to know, is OPR where the investigation starts on the preparers of fraudulent returns? It depends on who reports it and where they report it to. It could start in the return preparer office. It could start it with IRS criminal investigation. It could start with TICTA, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. So there are a whole bunch of different ways fraudulent preparers can be examined. Don says when he wasn't showing up for months on this list, he was showing up on the Freedom of Information list, but not on this list. And he talked to the OPR at the tax forum, and they asked if I updated my PTIN information to show that I was an EA. Yes, people, please, when you pass and you get your EA and you have your certificate in hand, or even if you have called them and they've given you your EA number, log into your PTIN account and update the information. When you do that, it will cross-reference and it will automatically make you appear on this particular RPO list. And notice it's operated by RPO. That's the Return Preparer Office. Okay, speaking of the Return Preparer Office, it is now headed by Carol Campbell. She actually has a Facebook page for IRS Tax Pros. And when she started in 2012, she had a greeting that she posted that you're still welcome to read in case you want to get to know her a little bit better. If you want to know more about the RPO, there's a link to the RPO website on the IRS system. And she is the one responsible for your PTINs and for the 749,000 people who have PTINs. RPO oversees the EA exams and the renewals, and it also oversees all of the AFSPs and the courses that go along with it, all of the continuing education courses that anyone provides are run through RPO's team, and they're the ones who review everything, audit instructors and programs like myself. And so they have a huge active job. So Don, it was the RPO folks who helped. That makes a little bit more sense, but anybody at OPR could have given you the same advice because the advice doesn't change. Log into your PTIN account. So she's responsible for all of the the tax preparers who handle electronic filing and who get paid, all the paid preparers. So she has a very large population with a lot of different things that she has to oversee. So her mission is to improve taxpayer compliance by providing comprehensive oversight and support of tax professionals. And I am really trying to get her to provide more support for tax professionals who are trying to sit for the EA exam. So I'm really trying to be a pain in her butt to help out when people are getting these horrible results when they show up at Prometric and they can't take the exam. Oh, that's very nice, Latre. Rosario, what is the best way to report somebody with the IRS who's doing funky things with people's tax returns? Well, we may talk about that today. If not, if you've got a specific question, post it in the board. But why don't you just kind of stick around? Maybe I've already got it in here. I don't know. I've taught this class so many times and 2 or 3 different versions of it. I don't know if I have it in here or not. But if not, I will answer you. So her vision is a community of tax practitioners working with the IRS to improve tax administration. So the IMRS, the issue management resolution system, I don't know if that's part of RPO or not. I'm not positive if it's part of RPO. The strategic goals, her job is to register and promote the qualified tax professional community, improve compliance and accuracy of tax returns prepared by tax preparers, which would be really great if we could get more EAs credentialed, engage stakeholders to create an environment that fosters compliance and program improvement. Once again, I might need to send her a note and highlight these with respect to how that applies to creating new EAs. But if you need to reach RPO, so they actually post their phone numbers on the website. This is not secret. So you've got the phone number and the fax number. The Facebook page, you can't really post anything. You can't start a new post. You can respond to some of her posts, but you can't really start a post with a problem or anything else over there. So if you want to contact them, you can contact them for enrollment questions, status of your EA application, things like that. And if you need to reach them, this is the phone number. They're open from 6:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time. This is their email address, and it's not for IRS verification if you're trying to confirm whether someone's actually an IRS employee. This particular mailbox, this PO box, is only for the enrolled agent program. They won't be responding to any other inquiries if you're using this particular program. So if anything changes, you have a name change, somebody gets married, an address change, or you need proof of CE credits that you don't find on your PTIN account and you can't get hold of the school that provided your education credits, you can give them a call or fax them directly. They're not that hard to reach. And they actually answer their phone. For those of you who like to play around with statistics, the changes in the PTIN community, we have for 2020, we had 781,000 people who had PTINs. Now, as of August 2nd of this year, we are down to 749,000 people with PTINs. We lost over 1,000 attorneys. We lost about 5,500 CPAs since last year. We lost nearly 100 EAs, even though we got a whole bunch new EAs who passed the exam. The enrolled retirement plan program isn't adding new people anymore, so some of them are retiring. And the annual filing season program record of completion, that's the only group that actually gained people. 1,700 more people got that annual filing season program record of completion. So this is where I get the information directly from this particular statistics page from the IRS about the fact that there are about 749,000 paid preparers with PTINs. A lot of people retired last year. A lot of people got out of the business because it was overwhelming. And what that leaves is a lot of room for new competent people who have the patience to be able to deal with the problems that your clients are now facing. And a lot of people are going to have some very unpleasant balances due. For 2020, so many people got away with paying for 1/3 of the taxes on all of those distributions they took from their IRAs, but they are not taking into account the fact that they're going to have to pay 1/3 of those taxes next year and the year after that, and they may have already spent the money. So they are definitely going to need some help with installment agreements, offers in compromise, and so forth. And for what it's worth, the number of PTINs that have been issued since they started the program in 2010, there were 1,773,000. And so we have over 1 million haven't stayed current. So yeah, look at that, right? So this chart is not really on the IRS website. I guess it is, but you have to scroll way down on this page to find it. This is from 2011. The difference between what RPO and OPR does is still very, very similar. And so what you can do is go to that page, scroll down, and you'll see the whole table. I just put up, like the top of the page that shows you the comparison between what does OPR do when it comes to PTINs and what does RPO do. So for the most part, you're going to see that a lot of the activity is handled by RPO, and OPR, the Office of Professional Responsibility, basically provides guidance, and RPO does all the work. Let's do the next polling question. Whoops. So for which issue would you turn to the Office of Professional Responsibility instead of the Return Prepare Office? So a complaint was filed about you by a tax preparer. Let me add that word. To find out if your EA application was approved, you want to appeal the denial of your PTIN. You want to fix something in your CAF file. So yes, the RPO also oversees the CAF file, which never seems to work. So the initial complaint filed by a taxpayer is going to go to RPO. And the EA application approval is going to go to RPO. But if your PTIN has been denied and you want to appeal that, you're going to go to the OPR. So the answer is ultimately going to be C. I'm going to leave that up for a while you sort it all out. Let's talk a little bit about the annual filing season program record of completion. So annual filing season program, why does anybody want to go to all of that trouble? Well, not everybody has an EA or a CPA or is an attorney. And if you haven't reached that point in your career, there is a way to get some kind of certificate. It's really just a certificate. It doesn't really mean anything. It's not a credential. But what it is, it's a very nice looking certificate that you can hang on your wall from the IRS. And the benefits for doing this, and there's going to be a cost to this, the benefits for doing this is you get to be included in that public database of return preparers that I showed you. And only people who have that annual filing season program record of completion are going to have the check the box authority for the third-party designee on the tax return. So on the bottom of the tax return where the taxpayer checks the box, if you're not an EA, CPA, or attorney, then you have to be at least an AFSP in order to be able to talk to the IRS about the tax return that you prepared. So, Patty did the RTRP because she was scared of the EA exam. This year, she's going to do the EA exam, and Angeline is able to represent tax returns that we prepared. If you prepared the tax return, you can represent the taxpayer in an IRS audit, but only in an audit, not appeals. We're going to talk a little bit more about what the benefits are that go with this, but I'm going to end the poll, and most people got it right that you go to the Office of Professional Responsibility if you want to appeal the denial of your PTIN. So at least with the AFSP, if somebody in your neighborhood is looking for a tax preparer, they're going to find you in the IRS database. So if you're not at least an AFSP, they're not going to find you in the official IRS preparer database. So what happens if you want to be the AFSP? How do you get that? Now, you don't necessarily want to do this, but if you haven't finished passing all 3 parts of the exam, you will want to do this. So, CPAs, EAs, and attorneys, all we have to do to keep our to stay in good standing with our credentials with the IRS is to have 15 units every year, 15 units of continuing education. We have to have 2 hours of ethics every year, 10 hours of federal tax law credits, and 3 hours of federal tax law updates. However, in order to be an AFSP, if you're not one of those groups, you have to do one of 2 things. You have to have 18 hours of the continuing education credit, which includes a 6-hour special annual federal tax refresher course, and it's annual, which means you have to take it every single year. And sitting through a 6-hour course is not all that bad, but the problem with that is you have to take a 100-question exam every single year when you take the 6-hour course. Who the heck wants to take that 100-question exam every single year? And you also then have to have 10 other hours of federal tax law and 2 hours of ethics. Now, you can get around that. You can get around that if you have passed part 1 of the EA exam, and there are a couple of other things that you can do. And I'll show you what those are in just a moment in order to avoid this 6-hour exam. I do not include this 6-hour class and 100-question exam as part of this course, okay? However, I do record one for Lambers, and if you want that, that course is live and running on Lambers right now. But if you really want to get your AFSP and you don't want to have to do this every year, what you want to do is You want to either pass the first part of the EA exam before the end of the year, then you'll only need the regular 3 hours of federal tax updates, 10 hours of federal tax law, and 2 hours of ethics. Today's class counts for the ethics. If you are a California, Oregon, or Maryland licensed tax professional, you're also exempt from that annual federal tax update course. Those people who went and did the RTRP exam years ago are also exempt. They don't have to sit through this 6-hour course, so it's too late for you to do that. Then there's another group, IRS VITA volunteers. And one of the reasons that VITA volunteers qualify is because Susan Holdgreave, who's going to be teaching you a couple of classes next week, Susan asked the question, we have to go through all this training. Can we get continuing education for it? And then when this whole thing came up with the P10, not only did we already have approval for continuing education credit because of Susan's question, but also the exemption from this AFTR 6-hour course and 100 question exam. So VITA quality reviewers, instructors, and preparers who pass the VITA exam are exempt from that. And then there is the Accreditation Council for Accountancy and Taxation. So preparers who hold that accreditation also qualify for that exemption. So these are the ways to get around that program. Now remember, the part 1 of the EA exam, you had to have passed within the last 2 years. So in order to avoid having to do this annual tax update class with the 100 question exam, once you pass part 1, try to finish the other 2 within the next 2 years. The other thing that we have is dealing with members of the IRS. And some of the things that happen is people who are not yet EAs, CPAs, and attorneys face a lot of stumbling blocks, and you get impatient and you get kind of angry. Don't lose your temper with the IRS staff. So don't lose your temper with the IRS staff. If you get abusive, if you're rough to these people, they have the power to report you to a supervisor. And that report can work its way up to the Office of Professional Responsibility. When Karen Hawkins was in charge of the professional responsibility, when she was director of practice, she had this little mantra. She says, don't be mean unless you're clean, because she is going to have her staff examine you thoroughly. And if you have any bad tax returns filed or anything else, if you have any bad audits, if you've made errors, they are going to go after you. So don't start a fight with anybody at the IRS. She was scary, but she was fair. Michael has a question. The list at another list shows 69,000. Michael, I'm not going to go through all of the different statistical information IRS has. I'm sticking with the one where they're publishing the P10s, okay? So don't try to reconcile the numbers, okay? This is not, those things aren't going to be on the exam. I'm just giving you information so you understand the overview of what's going on, all right? Oh, goodness. So their website, you may want to visit the website regularly to find out what's going on. IRS, TIGTA, and Treasury are in fact actively pursuing unscrupulous tax professionals. And so I probably do have information for you. I think Rosario was asking on the next page about how to turn people in, because I usually do things like that. I'm not a nice person. So here you go. First of all, you've got the main IRS phone number, which you never want to use, 1-800-TAX-1040. You can just sit there forever. The IRS forms line, it's not as easy to get forms anymore, but you can still call and see what it is that they are still printing that they will send to you. Most of the stuff we can get online and just print out, or it's in your tax software. You can reach the taxpayer advocate at 877, lots and lots of sevens with a 4 and an 8 somewhere in the middle. The IRS e-file program, they are generally pretty helpful and they answer fairly quickly. You do need to become an authorized e-file provider if you're going to be preparing tax returns on your own for the first time. And Susan is going to be talking about that. It's actually been switched to lecture 7 because she has a conflict of interest with the date. So that's already on your new calendar. Now, for criminal enforcement, 1-800-829-0433, you can report suspected tax fraud. You can use a form 14157 to report a tax preparer. And there is a page with IRS telephone assistance that has a whole lot of different contacts. One of the things that I don't have on this page is the form 211. Form 211, if you use that and you want to report somebody that you know is a tax cheat, including a tax professional, that is a form that would get you a reward, okay? Now, be very careful because although it's supposed to be confidential, and I've spoken to IRS attorneys and they say that this is meant to be confidential, the person that you're reporting will get an attorney. The attorney will do discovery and demand to see the application that you sent in on Form 211. Even if the IRS redacts the information, it's very likely there may be enough information that the accused attorney will be able to determine who you are. If you really want to go for the reward, first of all, make sure you have facts. Secondly, make sure you know where their money is. The IRS is not going to go after a 211 report if they can't collect a substantial amount of money. So if there's no money for the IRS to collect, or you don't know where their assets are, don't waste your time. But if you do, make sure you can be specific about what they're doing, specific about where the IRS can find their assets, turn it over to an attorney, and then your name won't be anywhere in there. And you will then not necessarily be subject to retaliation by the very angry person who is upset, not about breaking the law, but about being caught. Okay, and Freedom of Information has stuff there that people can pull, and not all of it's cleanly redacted. So more information, that page that I told you about that has a lot more information, IRS has all of this place where you can get help on a variety of reasons, and this is on the website. Now, during COVID-19, we have this whole situation with trying to get a power of attorney into the system. And it's not really that easy. It used to take a while before COVID, but at least we had a fax number that we could send it to, and sooner or later it would show up. Now it's taking many weeks for your power of attorney to show up in the system if you fax it. This year, about a month ago, the IRS unveiled their new Tax Pro account. And so If you are able to get that to work, and you're able to log in and set it up for yourself and every EA, CPA, or attorney in your firm to be able to get access to this, then if you're working with a client who is able to access his or her taxpayer system, because they've also improved the taxpayer system, if they are able to access their system, we can type in our power of attorney information on the new Tax Pro account. It's not exactly a Form 2848. It's not exactly a power of attorney, but it's very similar. We type in the information and notify the client that this is in the system. The client logs into their account and they approve the authorization for you. When they do that, your POA is active and live in the instant. You are then able to start pulling transcripts and everything else. The problem is the main people that we want to get powers of attorney for are non-filers or people who have kind of messed up in the system, and they may not be able to get access to their new taxpayer account. So what do? Well, call the practitioner priority service and fax it to them. If you're working with ACS, which you can only do if you are an EA, CPA, or attorney, they are not supposed to be talking to AFSPs or anyone who isn't a credentialed, enrolled tax preparer. The ACS is the automated collection system. If you are talking to somebody there, you can fax your power of attorney to them in collections and they'll be able to respond and work with you. And if you can't get through, you can try to use the call and queue system to get to the head of the phone line. However, I'm hearing from people this week that the call and queue system is getting backed up. They may have too many people who've signed up for the system. And what their system does is it keeps a computer phone keeps calling the IRS all the time. And when you call into their number, they place you at the front of the phone line. Well, if too many people are calling into the call-in queue system at the same time, it may take 15 or 20 minutes to get through, but at least that's still better than the hour and a half it's been taking. So the Tax Pro account, the new account that was just unveiled in July, you have this information. This is the link to the information. You can submit your information within 15 minutes or less if you know what you're doing. Then the taxpayer will electronically sign from their side, and you're going to have instant access to everything. The hours of service are 6 a.m. Eastern from Monday to Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern. Sunday, it's open from 10 a.m. to midnight, and then there are, of course, some maintenance downtimes. You can use this for a tax information authorization if you're not an EA, CPA, or attorney. So that's the Form 8821, where you're just trying to get information. You're not going to be able to use a two-way communication. You do have to already have a CAF number in good standing. So if you already have a CAF number, then you may be able to submit a Form 8821, have your client log in on their account and approve your authorization to pull information. For a power of attorney, you have to have a CAF number. You have to have authority to practice before the IRS as a CPA, EA, or attorney, or an enrolled actuary or enrolled retirement plan agent. So those are the credentials that you're going to need to make that work. Not that big a deal. It's just on our side, it's pretty easy. Oh, by the way, one of the things that came up is if we put several people in the power of attorney for a particular client and we want to get copies of the notice, IRS said that only the first 2 people that are listed on that electronic power of attorney are going to get notices. So if you have 5 people in the firm who are logged in as powers of attorney on a particular client, only the first 2 are going to be authorized to receive the copies of the notices. So make sure that you put people in order. So it's not the 2 most important, it's the first 2 that log in and do it. And you can't log in for another member of the firm. Each person has to log into their own account and do this. So staff can't go and log in and do this for them. That would be a federal crime. Let us do the next polling question. If you pass part 1 of the EA exam within the last 24 months, how many hours of CPE must you have to get your annual filing season record of completion? A, 18 hours plus 2 hours of ethics. B, 16 hours plus 2 hours of ethics. C, 15 hours plus 2 hours of ethics. Or D, 12 hours plus 2 hours of ethics. And so the answer is, in fact, C. You need 15 hours just like the rest of us. Yeah, and John says that if your information about the client isn't exactly the same as the wording and lettering on the IRS notice, it won't work. So you have to look at what they're showing on the tax return or the IRS notice. It has to actually match that information or the system will reject them. So it's a computer, it's not smart. It only knows what you tell them, and you already have experience with this concept with your PTIN account. Okay, let's end the poll, and practically everybody got it right. It's 15 hours, including 2 hours of ethics, if you pass at least part 1 of the EA exam. So let's look at Circular 230. We've been leading up to Circular 230 all this time. So Circular 230 is basically broken down into 6 sections, Part A, B, C, D, E, and the addendum. So some of these are in green. Those are the good parts. So subpart A is the rules governing authority to practice, and B, duties and restrictions relating to practice before the IRS, and E includes the general provisions. Subpart C and D are red because those are the bad ones. Those are the sanctions for violations and the rules for disciplinary hearings. And the addendum is neutral because it's got whatever they decide to add to the publication. Not a heck of a lot. So when it comes to us working with the Office of Professional Responsibility, overseeing what we're doing, looking over our shoulder, these are what I think are our main goals. This is not on the exam. This is about you. You want to behave ethically. You want to guide your clients towards ethical behavior, which may not always be easy because they may want to do things that you know are not correct. It's our obligation to stay informed about the changes in the tax law and procedures, whether it takes 15 hours or 500 hours. It's impossible to do a correct tax return if you are not up to date on all of the changes that affect your particular client base. So as a result of that, you want to learn the shortcuts to the tax maze and where you can get the best summaries and the best information in the shortest amount of time. So you want to find the most reliable people, and they're not always me. There are other people who do a really good job summarizing the changes in the tax laws, which is why I'm always pointing you to other options. And above all, you want a CYA, cover your you know what, with respects to your client's demands. So when your clients are insisting that they want you to do something that you don't want to do, first of all, you may not want to do it at all. But if you're going to do it, we'll talk about what's the best way to CYA. The best way is Tax Mama's mantra: document, document, document. I've got to tell you, this is literally the most important thing I can teach you in life, not just when it comes to your clients. Anytime you have any kind of an issue arise with anything, keep notes. Document what's going on. Document the people you're talking about. If you're buying something and want to return it, if you have a contract with somebody, keep the information with anything that you have discussed. Keep summaries of all of the information. You're going to need it later. Okay, so very definitely keep good records. So for our purposes, what is this that we want you to document? I know I'm getting very boring about this, but anytime you have a conversation with the IRS, with a client, or anybody else, make sure you write down the name of the person. And if they are a government employee, get their employee number. If they're a client, you don't need their employee number, maybe the file number, the date and time of the conversation. If there is contact information available, get that information. One of the things I do, I have paper files. One of the things I do on my paper files on the folder is on the cover of the folder, I keep the master information so I can quickly look up names, phone numbers, email addresses, and so forth. And I write a date next to them because, people move, and this is the last time I knew that this phone number was good, and so forth. Summarize the key points of any discussion. And if you have an agreement that you're going to do something by a specific date, make a note of that, put that on your calendar. If your client says they're going to do something by a specific date, make a note, put that on the calendar. If the IRS says that they're going to do something by a specific date, make a note on that. So I keep track of all of that stuff, and you don't need a fancy client management system. You can just do it on paper. You can do it in Word and keep folders for every client by year and so forth, so that you have the information. I have folders for every client and subfolders by year, or if they have multiple entities, subfolders by entity and then by year, and then I'll have my notes and so forth in there. When you're getting missing information from the client, you're working on their tax return, you got all of the paperwork and everything, but there's stuff missing, I give them a written list asking them for the additional information. I will not accept their answers by phone. I don't want to take it verbally. I want them to write it down or email it to me or fax it to me. So I definitely will not take verbal information. I had one client who told me something on the phone, and then later on she says, I never told you that. That was the last time, I think it was around 1980, that was the last time I accepted anything verbally. You only need to make the mistake once. So ever since then, I pass along my errors to you. Patty says, I print out all the emails too. Yeah, anything that has responses that go with the tax return or instructions, if we're working on a representation case, any of those things, yeah, Patty's right. I print those and put those into the file. And every time we finish a tax return, I will review everything Lulu does. Lulu will review everything I do. So we've got the double review, and we will ask each other questions. You know, we try to make sure to put enough clarity in the material so that somebody looking over what we've done won't have questions, but there are always questions. And if there are, that means we have to include more notes to make sure that we explain, you know, how we took a position, how we broke up certain numbers and information and things like that. So first we get the information, then I don't guess at mileage. You know, I don't guess at what percentage of their expenses were meals and entertainment and so forth. But if they don't give me a breakdown, I'm going to use a percentage that is not in their favor. So if they have a bunch of meals and entertainment and travel and they don't break it out, I'm going to say that most of that travel cost, that at least half of it is going to be meals and entertainment, or a very small part is meals, the entertainment isn't deductible. So, you know, if I have to break it down myself, it's not going to be favorable. When they keep their own records, they end up with much higher deductions. Some of the other tools that we've given you, if you go to topic number 381 in the board, we have a mini engagement letter, a client questionnaire, a CYA letter, which is what we use every year. I update this annual disclosure form, try to cram it into one page. We won't do the tax return until they've signed that CYA letter every single year. And if there's a couple, they each have to sign it. We have a tax return checklist. Everything is a Word doc that you can put on your own stationery. So we've got a bunch of things, some things that some of the students have contributed. And this year, Nivaldo contributed 2 more engagement letters for representation. So those are on this page on 381 that you can use. Everything here is for you to use any way you want. You can update it. They're all Word files so that you can edit them and customize them for your client base. Let's do the next polling question. And we update things as we go along, and we have new ideas and information, or you give us ideas. Which method of documenting your contacts with clients, the IRS, and state agencies was not recommended? A, ask the agent to slowly repeat their name and ID number. B, record the conversation. C, make note of the date and time of the conversation. D, summarize the agreements and deadlines, and if possible, send a note or email to the IRS to memorialize these deadlines, targets, or agreements. So the one thing we don't recommend is that you record the conversation. It's illegal to record anything without the individual's knowledge, which is why you are now hearing on the Zoom classes and all of the Zoom events, you are now getting a recording at the beginning saying this is being recorded. You know, that by your participation, you are accepting knowledge, you're willing to be recorded. So whatever the legal wording it is that they're using. So B is the correct answer. I'll leave that open. All right, so who is able to practice before the IRS? So now we're getting into kind of the meat of the Circular 230 issue. The following people can practice as long as they're not under suspension: attorneys, CPAs, enrolled agents, enrolled actuaries, enrolled retirement plan agents. Unenrolled preparers have very, very limited rights. This group of people, the attorneys, CPAs, enrolled agents, enrolled actuaries, enrolled retirement plan actuaries, they are called practitioners. So in the Circular 230, when they are talking about practitioners, they are only talking about this group of people and the RTRPs, the Registered Tax Return Preparer. So let's look at the polling question. We've got 95% of people in, and practically everybody got B. We don't recommend you record the conversation. So the registered tax return preparer designation is gone. You can't get it anymore, but those people who got it are still included in this particular definition. Now, this is another reason why Circular 230 needs to be updated, because there are a lot of references to registered tax return preparers in Circular 230, and that designation technically no longer exists, even if, people like Patty still get to take advantage of that for having taken the one exam. And now she has to take that exam every year for that. Well, she doesn't have to take the exam every year for the AFSP because of it. All right, who is not allowed to practice before the IRS? So government officials, federal and state officials are not allowed to practice before the exam, before the IRS. Amelia wants to know, why are AFSP folks not included? Because Circular 230 was written in 2014 and there was no such thing as AFSP then. Remember, I've told you, this is way out of date. So we're going to get there, though. Trust me. Okay. Unenrolled preparers can't practice before the IRS, except AFSPs who have the record of completion. So AFSPs, RTRPs, and certain people who have that other tax designation, and people who are licensed in California, Oregon, or Maryland, they get the record of completion. So they get their AFSP and they get their record of completion. They are going to have limited rights. They are going to be able to represent taxpayers before IRS examination division and nothing else. Not collections, not appeals, nowhere else. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. For the unenrolled, they can't do anything. They can't represent anyone in exam, collections, appeals. They can't execute claims for refund. They can't receive refund checks. Basically, the only thing they can do is prepare and sign a tax return, period. If they respond to IRS notices and write a letter, IRS is not going to respond to them at all. They might read it, but they're not going to give them any respect. Now, who has any rights at all? Well, if you look at the Form 2848, which is the power of attorney, it has all of these different categories. So believe it or not, you don't necessarily have to be a tax professional to represent somebody. You can represent members of your immediate family. Does not include in-laws. A regular full-time employee of an individual employer is allowed to represent the employer, but not a part-time employee. A general partner or a full-time employee of the partnership can represent the partnership. An officer of a corporation or S corporation or any subsidiary of the corporation, or a regular full-time employee of that corporation can represent the corporation. If we're dealing with trusts, then what we're looking at are guardianships or estates. Full-time employees of the trust may represent the trust or the estate. Now we get to the officer or regular employee of the government agency. Now they're not saying they have to be full-time employees. So a regular employee of a government agency can represent the agency, whether they're full or part-time. And then look at what we have in red. An individual may represent anybody who is outside the United States, before the personnel of the IRS if the representation takes place outside the United States. What does this mean? It means somebody who knows nothing about US tax law, doesn't have a language requirement, they don't even have to speak English, is able to represent somebody outside the United States. So the shoeshine boy downstairs can represent the individual who has an IRS tax issue and they live in Spain. That's basically what that says. That one really needs to go. And I was going to say, especially now that Prometric is running the exam and they have exams outside the US, except they're not running the exams outside the US. And there is also another category is people who prepare and sign a tax return, but are not required by the instructions or tax regulations to sign the tax return. And so basically, what you're looking at here is somebody who isn't required to sign, but let's say we're talking about VITA volunteers or volunteers at one of those tax clinics tied to the colleges or universities, you know, that is another group that is able to be on a power of attorney. But this is your ace in the hole. There is a provision for special appearances, and you notice that whole power of attorney list did not include, let's say, the part-time bookkeeper or the external accountant or bookkeeper who may not be an EA, CPA, or attorney, but you're the only one who knows everything that's going on in the books. You're the only one who can really answer questions. So you can contact the Office of Professional Responsibility and get an authorization for the one-shot deal to represent your client in a particular instance. And so you want to contact the Office of Professional Responsibility and get a letter from them. It's not the same thing as getting a CAF number, a centralized authorization number, but this will get you a CAF number because you'll be able to fill out the power of attorney and have your client sign it along with this letter from the Office of Professional Responsibility. Do VITA preparers sign the tax returns? I don't know if the actual preparers do or if the supervisors do, but somebody certainly does sign those tax returns. They are not filed as self-prepared. So I mentioned that there are students and volunteers in the qualified low-income taxpayer clinics, the student tax clinics, the VITA volunteers. If you don't have experience doing tax returns yet, and you're not willing to get a job or not ready to get a job and commit yourself full time, volunteering for VITA or TCE, tax counseling for the elderly, which is a lot of the AARP sites, is an excellent way to get safe training. There is no danger in it. You're not responsible. Your license isn't on the line. You're able to make mistakes. Somebody else is going to correct those. It is a great, safe opportunity to learn about some of the things that the IRS is most concerned about, which is a lot about the refundable credits. A lot of the refundable credits are run through those VITA tax returns because they're basically helping low-income people and seniors. So, you know, these are the areas where the IRS issues up to like $2,200 penalties per tax return if you don't go through the complete questionnaire. This is great practice for it. David says the VITA preparer doesn't sign the tax return. The site is shown on the return as the signator. Okay. So there is some information, and the person running the site is still overall, if they open. Yeah. Well, since COVID, a lot of those places have not opened. I know that Susan has been running one in Pennsylvania, and they were operating this year. Let's do the next polling question. So some places they operate. What representation rights do you have if you're an unenrolled preparer with an AFSP record of completion? Check the box authority, file an appeal after an audit, call the IRS to arrange for an offer in compromise, call the IRS to get a levy lifted. So we have no authority with anything in collections or appeals, only the check the box authority. Now, who may not practice before the IRS ever? Well, corporations, associations, and partnerships. So only people can be on a power of attorney. You don't get a power of attorney for the entire firm. You don't get a power of attorney for the corporation or the association. The power of attorney goes with the specific individual, with that individual's CAF number, their centralized authorization file number, and with their social security number. So you can't do that if you are a corporation. You have to be a living, breathing person. What happens if you lose your eligibility to practice? Well, you can lose it in the following ways. One, you don't meet the requirements for, hang on a second here. There we go. You don't meet the requirements for renewing the enrollment, like you don't get all of the continuing education that you're supposed to get. That's one way to lose your eligibility to practice. You can request to be placed on inactive retirement status, or you can get suspended or disbarred for violating the regulations of practice. Now, just because somebody does not necessarily meet all of the continuing education requirements will not necessarily make them ineligible immediately. There's time to fix that. Let's go back to the polling question. Only 84% of people have responded. I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1, closing. Practically everybody got it right. There you go. As long as you get 6 out of the 8, you're fine. Normally, I have a lot of hours of continuing education during the year that I spent pretty much in the hospital or at chemo or radiation. And the only thing that I used my energy for that year was to teach this class. I didn't also have enough time to get all of the CPE that I really wanted to get that I normally would have gotten. And so I knew I was going to come up short. Although, you know, if you get a lot of CPE every year, they're looking at the average. You have to have 72 hours over 3 years, but you do have to have a minimum of 16 hours a year. So even though you don't do the full 24 hours every year, you do have to have a minimum of 16 hours. And that year I was not getting that. And they cut back the number of hours that they count towards your teaching time or your writing time. I think that year also. So I wasn't getting the 16 hours I needed. So I called them. I said, look, you know, I normally have all the hours I need to renew. And I'm disclosing right now that I haven't got all of the hours, but I will make it up next year. You disclose and you're not going to become ineligible. You're not going to lose your eligibility and you won't be suspended. So you don't even have to go through temporary suspension because you didn't meet the requirements. Let them know if something's going on. And these days, a lot of people have been ill because of COVID. So a lot of people may face the situation where they fail to meet the requirements. If it reaches the point where the IRS determines that you have not met all of the requirements, they're going to send you a letter. And when they send you a letter, you have 60 days to respond before you actually get suspended or disbarred. Now, according to Karen Hawkins at the time, she said one of the biggest reasons why people got suspended was they didn't respond to the notice. That's it. If they had responded to the notice, she says, of all of the people who respond to the notice, more than 90% of them get resolved at that level. They respond to the notice, there's a conversation back and forth, and the issue gets resolved. So more than 90% of the situations get fixed simply by responding to the notice. And one of the reasons I'm emphasizing this is some of you go on long-term vacations or you leave town for a long period of time. Make sure there is somebody opening your mail. Make sure that if there's mail from the IRS for you, that they open it and scan it for you, get it to you, upload it to you, or whatever. So either you have somebody in your office, or if you actually close your office, spring for the funds to go to one of those mailbox places that are privately owned. US Post Office isn't going to do this for you. Franchise places may or may not do it for you. Find somebody where you've got a mom and pop shop kind of place and ask them, give them authorization in writing to open your mail and let them know how to scan it and upload it into the cloud, into a secure folder for you, so that you can look at all of that, anything that's important from IRS, clients, whatever, final notices from bill collectors before they turn off your internet access, all of that stuff, so that anything that requires a quick response, you have it in time. So the other thing is, of course, if there's disreputable conduct basically will get somebody disbarred faster than you can snap your fingers. And one of the things that is included in disreputable conduct is being abusive, verbally, physically, or otherwise, to an IRS employee. So be very, very careful about how you react to people when you're getting seriously frustrated. If somebody ends up on the inactive roster, they may stay there for a period of 3 years. If they fail to respond to the notice of noncompliance, if they fail to submit their application for renewal of enrollments or don't satisfy the requirements of eligibility. These days, the IRS is no longer sending out a notice telling you it's time to renew. You're supposed to know when your enrollment ends. One way to do that is look at your EA card, and it will tell you when your enrollment ends, and then you can log into the system, pay your fee, answer the questions, do it all online, and you're fine. If you want to be reinstated once you've been placed on the inactive roster, you can do it within 3 years as long as you satisfy all the requirements for renewal, which means if you didn't have all of the continuing education or something like that, you call the IRS return prepare office. So this is where we go to the return prepare office and say, look, I'd like to get reinstated. What is it you want me to do? How many hours do you want me to prove that, do you want me to do 150 hours because I needed, 72 hours or whatever? Tell me how many hours you want from me and I will get the requisite continuing education. Is there anything else you want me to do in order to get reinstated? Just ask them. They'll tell you. And if you don't do anything for 3 years, and by the way, not filing tax returns, not paying taxes, not being in compliance will get you disbarred. So if you don't fix it within 3 years, you're gone and the enrollment is terminated. And if you then want to get reinstated, you're going to have to go through the 3 exams, the investigation, and everything else. And I've already shown you that there is a master roster of P10 holders. The P10 office sends a reminder to renew. So the EA renewal doesn't necessarily have that. No, the P10, you have to renew every single year. P10 system is not keeping track of when your EA expires. I'm not sure, but I'm going to show you how you can track this. So if you request to be placed in inactive retirement status, during that time, you're not eligible to practice. But while you're in an inactive status, there are a lot of people who retire. And the fact is that after you've been running a practice or working in a practice for a long time, it's really nice to take a break and retire for a couple of months, maybe 4. But you know what? After about 6 months, you're going to go stir crazy. So don't just resign your EA, just put it into inactive status. Meanwhile, keep up with your continuing education so that if you want to get reinstated, you don't have to do anything except submit your continuing education to the IRS and say, okay, reinstate me, make me an EA again. Let's do the next polling question. And that is, who never has the right to represent a taxpayer before the IRS? A bookkeeper who is the most knowledgeable about the taxpayer's records, a legal corporation, a law firm, an enrolled agent, a certified public accountant. So the correct answer is the corporation. Corporations are not people. They can never represent the taxpayer. Remember, we talked about the bookkeeper? The bookkeeper can get special rights to represent clients. They can go to the Office of Professional Responsibility and ask for special written permission. They can get a one-shot deal. So the answer is going to be B. Corporations are not people. They can't be on a power of attorney. Representing means power of attorney. All right, I'm going to close the poll. We have 94% of the people in, so 3, 2, 1. Got 95% of people in, and most people have this correct. 7 people have this wrong. This will be on the exam. So when you see a question like this, if it says the bookkeeper perhaps got special permission or whatever, or you get a question exactly like this, it's going to be the corporation. It's not even a gray area. Corporations can never sign on a power of attorney. All right. Some of the key provisions of Circular 230 are due diligence, conflict of interest, taxpayer checks, competence, and procedures to ensure compliance. And all of these things are being recommended to be updated by the AICPA, actually. So due diligence is section 10.22 and 10.37. And basically what it says is that if we're going to prepare a tax return, we don't necessarily have to audit it, but we have to know exactly what's going on and whether or not the client is telling us the truth. And a lot of the work that I put in to showing you how to do the sample tax returns and helping you understand in Accounting 101 the kinds of things your clients have a tendency to bury and get wrong and the things that I want you to question, that's part of due diligence. Don't just take things for granted. If something doesn't look right, if it obviously doesn't look right, it is your obligation under section 10.22 to ask the questions. We have to exercise the due diligence when preparing, approving, and filing tax returns, determining the correctness of letters and oral presentations to the client or to Treasury. And then there is the issue of relying on another's work product. And relying on another's work product is a very broad thing. So if you have somebody working for you that is doing tax returns or bookkeeping or payroll or anything else, you have to oversee and review their work. Somebody has to review that work and make sure it's correct. So relying on another's work product is not just about getting information from another accounting office or from an attorney and relying on that. You have to understand if there are things in any material that you get, like the K1s you're getting from somebody that you're, some entity your client invested in, if it doesn't make sense or information is missing, you're not exercising due diligence if you don't ask the questions. So it's, in order to be a real enrolled agent, in order to be a real tax practitioner, due diligence is one of the most important skills that you need to learn. In Section 10.34, it says we may not sign a tax return or advise a position on a tax return if it lacks a reasonable basis, if it's an unreasonable position, if it's a willful attempt to understate a liability, is reckless, intentional disregard of rules and regulations, and patterns matter. If the IRS, if OPR sees that you have established a pattern in deliberately ignoring or falsifying information, you're going to be in trouble. They will run a program to pull up all tax returns under your PTIN, and they will start auditing all of your clients if they see that. Now, when it comes to patterns matter, one of the things that is not quite the same is if you habitually make a certain mistake, and it really is a mistake. For instance, if you pick up commuting miles because you really don't understand that commuting miles are not business miles, they may slap you on the wrist for that, but they'll let you fix that for the future. So when they're looking at patterns, they're looking at deliberate, willful, and reckless behavior. For instance, filing tax returns for people with itemized deductions on mortgages when they don't own a house, creating children to get refundable credits when they don't have any. Conflicts of interest. Anytime we see a conflict of interest on a tax return, we absolutely have to stop working on that tax return or on that representation, and we have to have the client sign a release. We have to do it within 30 days of realizing that there is a conflict of interest. We have to have the client sign a release saying, yes, I understand that there is a conflict of interest. I understand what the conflict of interest is, but I do want you to continue to represent us. One of the big areas where you're going to run into conflicts of interest is when you're dealing with a married couple and they are filing a joint return and there is a huge balance due. You need to make sure that the other spouse is aware of that balance due and is aware that if they sign a joint return, she or he is going to be 100% liable for the other spouse's tax debts, not just their own taxes, but the unpaid tax that's on that joint return. Sometimes it is better to file married filings separately to protect one of the spouses and their assets than to file a joint return. People who end up creating these kinds of large balances due, usually when one person has a business and the other has a job, they usually end up continuing to do that over a period of time and mismanaging finances. And very often, the pattern is very often it will lead to divorce. Unfortunately, it will. And so if they have filed joint returns, when, let's say it's her, she leaves, she's going to be responsible for his taxes that she didn't create. And they're going to attach her wages because her wages are going to be easy to find. They're not going to attach his income because he's self-employed and it's harder to find his income. And IRS takes the easiest path. This is a long time. How does injured or innocent spouse come into play? That becomes a whole other nightmare, but that happens after the fact. You can avoid that, and you must avoid that if you're aware of a conflict. This code section says if you don't let them know that there's a conflict and they don't sign a release allowing you to continue to work on both of their tax returns, you can be held liable for anything that results. So be very, very careful. Taxpayer checks. This used to be a big issue about negotiating, cashing, or endorsing taxpayer checks. Not so much anymore because these days we're filing electronically and the IRS has pushed the electronic deposits of refunds. So most of the time we are not seeing people even getting paper checks. But one of the things we used to do back in the paper days is if our clients were traveling, we would have the checks come to our office and deposit the checks for them into their bank accounts. We don't want to do that anymore. Now, make sure that they have the refunds deposited electronically. We don't want to get into that. So basically, there is a penalty for doing this. EAs are allowed to receive the checks, but we're not allowed to cash them, endorse them, deposit them, or anything else, even if the client says it's okay. Next issue is competence. Section 10.35, we have to have the competence to engage in practice before the IRS. And we have to be competent to take on certain kinds of clients. So if we're taking on a client that operates in a particular industry and we don't know anything about that industry, we have to make sure to learn about that industry or to bring in a consultant to work with us. If we take on clients and we have no idea about how their industry works and we end up making all kinds of mistakes because we don't understand the tax credits that are available, the special ways their deductions are handled or anything else, or the specific depreciation rules that apply to that industry, you are in deep doo-doo. So if the client ends up being audited and the IRS assesses a bunch of tax, you're going to be liable to the client, not just to the IRS. There are going to be preparer penalties and you could get disbarred. So you have to make sure that you maintain a level of competence for the kind of clients you're working with. If you know nothing about business tax returns, you don't know about accounting, and you don't know about generally accepted accounting principles and so forth, and you want to work with businesses, you need to get the education and training. If you don't have that education and training, stick with doing representation. It's easier than having to know enough to prepare the tax returns. The other issue is the procedures to ensure compliance. Anybody who runs a practice or who has staff in a practice, they have to make sure that the staff has policies and procedures that are being followed to make sure that everybody in the firm is on the same page. They are working with the same level of competence and ethics. And if they learn that somebody in the firm is doing something reckless, they have their own attitude or their own style on how they're doing something, they need to get rid of that person. If they can't stop what they're doing, if they can't retrain them, you need to fire that person. The manager who is too weak to fire somebody doing that kind of stuff will lose their license. So it's really important to go through this section 10.36 through all of these steps. One of the interesting people you may have run into online is Clarice Landreth, and she's working for a firm in Colorado that has, I don't know, 30 or 40 attorneys working for the firm. Her job is compliance. Her job is to audit all the work that goes out and make sure that they have quality control and that nothing leaves the office that doesn't meet the firm standards. So the larger the firm, the more necessary it is to have one person who is in charge of quality control and who reviews everything. She's just blossoming into the most amazing professional. She is an EA, and she had me come in and teach the entire firm a real quick 1 weekend EA course and crash course, and they all took the EA exam, and all the attorneys are now EAs. The reason the attorneys wanted to be EAs is because the IRS is less threatened by somebody coming in as an EA than coming in as an attorney. They are less, they're less suspicious. If it's an attorney, they're concerned that there may be criminal activity or something more wrong. If it's an EA, they're just regular, tax representatives. Yes, she is not only teaching for NTI fellowship, she has been overseeing and working with putting programs together for NAEA. As I said, she is just blossoming into an amazing professional. She's very passionate and very competent. What an organized woman. That is the last thing for today. Let's do the next polling question. And that is, who has the principal authority to ensure the firm is in compliance? Only the owner or managing partner? Only the person who's in charge of quality control and reviewing the work of the staff? Anyone who has or shares principal authority and responsibility for overseeing a firm's Circular 230 practice? Only the person who signs the tax return. So the principal authority is C. The principal authority is C. Her name is Clarice Landreth. And yes, now that the attorneys are all EAs on their power of attorney, they're identifying themselves as EAs. So that's the box they're checking on the power of attorney form. That was the purpose. These guys had already been doing representation for collections issues for a long time. They didn't really need me to teach them that. That's why I was able to do a quickie review course, because they already had a lot of knowledge. So I wasn't doing it from scratch. At least they had a lot of knowledge in part 3. They didn't know a heck of a lot in part 1 or 2. So we've got 84% of people in. So it was such a nice group of people. We've got 89%. I am going to close the poll. So 3, 2, 1, the answer is anyone who has or shares principal authority and responsibility for overseeing a firm's Circular 230 practice. So if you're at the exam and you see awkward wording like that, it's probably coming straight out of the code. And the answer is C, and everybody got it except one person.